December 1944, an American infantry platoon near St. Vith, Belgium, watches 3 German Tiger tanks grind toward their foxholes. The sergeant orders his Bazooka team into a new position. 2 men carrying a 30 lb M9 launcher that was supposed to kill tanks. They set up, aim at the lead tank's turret at 100 yards, and fire. The 2.36-inch rocket hits dead center. It explodes with a flash of orange and black smoke, barely scratching the paint. The Tiger tank's turret doesn't even traverse. 3 minutes later, that entire platoon is either captured or dead. This wasn't a one-off failure. This was the standard experience for American infantrymen in the Ardennes. From mid-1944 onward, German heavy armor had rendered existing man-portable rockets obsolete. The Panther tank came with 80 mm of sloped frontal armor. The Tiger II had 150 mm. The King Tiger, which started appearing in greater numbers in late 1944, rolled into battle with 150 mm of hardened steel protecting its front. And American foot soldiers had practically nothing that could stop a frontal assault. Let's talk about what they did have. The M9 Bazooka, America's primary answer to armored vehicles, could penetrate 80 mm of armor at 300 yards under perfect conditions. Perfect conditions meant a 90-degree impact angle, no ricochet, on flat, non-sloped plate. Combat conditions were never perfect. The Bazooka's rocket was often deflected by rain or snow, kicked hard by crosswinds, and required 2 soldiers to operate in the open. Most importantly, it couldn't reliably stop anything heavier than a Panzer IV. By late 1944, the situation was desperate. When the U.S. Army pushed into Germany, their standard-issue bazooka was the M9. This was the same weapon that had served well in North Africa and Sicily. Against a moving King Tiger, it was about as effective as throwing snowballs. Some airborne units carried gammon bombs, devices you were supposed to physically place on a tank's engine deck. The survival rate for paratroopers attempting this maneuver was roughly what you'd expect for someone running toward a 70-ton steel behemoth. The British supplied the Piat, projector, infantry, anti-tank, which launched a 2.5 lb bomb using a powerful, cumbersome spring. It had a practical range of about 115 yards, required immense strength to cock, and frequently failed to penetrate the thick hides of late-war German tanks. One American captain in the Hurtgen forest described it as a shoulder-fired prayer. The Soviets had the RPG-43 grenade that required soldiers to get within 20 yards of tanks spitting machine gun fire. Here's what made this situation genuinely terrifying for Allied commanders. Blitzkrieg doctrine was evolving. German armored philosophy by late 1944 centered on overwhelming breakthroughs with heavy tanks. Panzers supported by panzer grenadiers and artillery, all moving in coordinated assaults. When a King Tiger battalion attacked your line, you couldn't just dig in and wait for your own Shermans to arrive. Your own Shermans were probably burning 2 kilometers back. You needed something a 20-year-old rifleman could carry, aim, and fire before that Tiger's cannon turned him into red mist. Something that would actually punch through the armor and stop the tank. By late 1944, after watching entire regiments get mauled by German heavy panzers in France and the Low Countries, Allied field commanders were sending the same frantic message to the rear. Give us something portable that kills heavy tanks, or we're going to lose men by the thousand, one overrun company at a time. The casualty reports made the physics brutally clear. During the Lorraine campaign in 1944, German Panther tanks decimated Allied attacks specifically because foot soldiers had no effective countermeasure. The problem wasn't bravery or tactics. The problem was engineering. Infantrymen were bringing 80 mm of penetration to a 150 m armor fight. And that's the situation facing U.S. Army ordnance in late 1944. Fix this problem immediately, or start writing letters to families explaining why their sons were helpless against machines they couldn't damage. The solution arrived in the form of 2 Army engineers standing in a Detroit arsenal with a wider tube and a radical idea. Major John Cole had spent weeks working on a larger caliber rocket, a bigger explosive projected by a more powerful motor that a soldier could theoretically handle. The prototype barely worked, but the rocket's backblast was powerful enough to knock the operator off his feet. Not ideal. Captain Robert Miles watched one of Cole's test launches and asked the critical question, "What if we don't just upgrade the rocket? What if we redesign the whole system for a bigger warhead?" Cole looked at him like he'd suggested building a new tank out of spare parts. Then they ran the numbers. A slightly larger tube, open at both ends, would allow a much larger rocket motor's exhaust to vent safely backward while the projectile flew forward. The operator would stand clear of the backblast, aim, fire, and if the physics worked, stay conscious. They tested the first prototype in October 1944 at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Miles found a wider piece of seamless tubing, measured it to match the new rocket's diameter, and fashioned a new electrical firing system. They mounted it on a modified shoulder stock from an M9 Bazooka. The entire assembly looked like something cobbled together in a high school shop class, because that's essentially what it was. The first test shot went 80 yards and struck within 5 feet of the target. The second shot went 70 yards and landed 10 feet right. The third shot flew perfectly straight and punched a clean hole through a captured Panther tank's side armor. But here's what mattered. The tube didn't buckle. The operator didn't get knocked out. And the rocket motor generated enough velocity to potentially defeat a heavy tank. Army Ordnance observers watching from a concrete bunker saw exactly what they needed: a portable concept that could turn the tide. General Marcus Thorne, Chief of Ordnance Development, saw the demonstration and immediately ordered the project to be fast-tracked. By November 1944, they had a designation: the M20 rocket launcher. By December, someone nicknamed it the Super Bazooka. The name stuck before the official paperwork could even be filed. Now came the challenges. The M20 launched a 9 lb rocket with a 3.5-inch diameter shaped charge warhead. Shaped charges work through a remarkable physics principle. An explosive formed around a copper cone focuses the blast into a molten jet of metal that slices through steel like a plasma torch. In theory, the M20's warhead could penetrate over 10 inches of armor plate. In theory. In practice, stability was a major issue. At 75 yards, a critical range for infantry combat, the larger rocket could yaw unexpectedly. At 150 yards, you were essentially aiming at a specific tank and hoping to hit it. The problem wasn't the warhead's power or the motor's thrust. The problem was aerodynamics. Without a way to stabilize the heavier rocket's flight, small variations in wind or motor burn would send the projectile off course. Sometimes it flew true, sometimes it drifted, sometimes it veered off like a badly thrown football. Field tests in late 1944 showed the scope of the problem. Soldiers at Fort Bragg fired 100 test shots at stationary tank targets at 100 yards. Hit rate, 42%. Against a moving target, hit rates fell below 25%. Officers watching these tests did the grim calculation. If your bazooka team only hits 1 shot in 4, and you only get 1 chance before that tank's machine gunner spots you, you're not stopping an armored assault. You're just making noise before you die. By December 1944, Army Ordnance faced a stark choice: scrap the Super Bazooka program or fix the stability problem before thousands of GIs faced Tiger tanks with a weapon they couldn't aim. The proposal landed on Colonel Frank Fletcher's desk at Aberdeen Proving Ground in January 1945, like an unpinned grenade. A civilian ordnance consultant named Dr. Arthur Klein had spent a month analyzing the M20's stability failures and concluded the Army was solving the wrong problem. Instead of tweaking the motor or the warhead's weight, he suggested they add stabilizing fins to the rear of the rocket itself. Fletcher's response, according to meeting notes, was swift. Absolutely not. His logic seemed sound to everyone present. Fins add weight and complexity. They can be damaged during transport. They might not deploy correctly in cold weather. They could alter the rocket's center of gravity, making the problem even worse. This gyroscopic spin stabilizes the bullet's flight. But the Super Bazooka wasn't firing a bullet. It was firing a rocket with its own motor still pushing it. Fletcher argued that adding fins would create unpredictable aerodynamic drag. The weapon might become even less accurate or worse. The rocket could veer sharply and endanger friendly troops. There was another concern that Fletcher didn't voice, but everyone understood. They'd already begun tooling up for production of 20,000 M20 rockets. These weapons were on the verge of mass production at 2 factories. Some were already being rushed to the front in Europe. If fins proved necessary, every single rocket would need to be either scrapped or recalled and rebuilt. The cost would be astronomical. The delay would mean troops fighting through the Battle of the Bulge and beyond without an effective answer to German heavy tanks. Klein pushed back. And this is where the story gets fascinating. He wasn't just an academic. He was a German-born aeronautical engineer who'd worked extensively on rocket stabilization before fleeing the Nazis in 1938. He had helped develop the principles behind early American rocket designs, and he brought wind tunnel data. His calculations showed that a simple fin assembly, deployed by spring action as the rocket left the tube, would provide immediate stabilization. The fins wouldn't fight the motor's thrust, they would guide it. The spin wouldn't fight the motor thrust, it would complement it. He also pointed out something deeply embarrassing. The Germans were already doing this. Intelligence reports from captured Panzerschreck rockets, Germany's upgunned copy of the original American Bazooka, showed the Germans had added a fin stabilizing ring to their projectiles, and their accuracy was significantly better than the American M9. The meeting ended with Fletcher rejecting the proposal. His written denial cited unacceptable production delays and insufficient field testing. In military bureaucratic terms, that meant, we're not risking our production schedule on your theory when we have a design that is good enough. Klein had one option left. He knew Major Cole from earlier ordnance development work. Cole, despite his rank, had a reputation for championing effective solutions. More importantly, Cole had General Thorne's respect. So Klein did what determined engineers have done since the invention of bureaucracy. He went around the official chain of command. Within 3 days, Cole had arranged for Klein to brief Thorne directly. The general listened for 20 minutes to the explanation about aerodynamic stability, rocket motor physics, and German intelligence reports. Then he made a decision that would change the course of American anti-tank warfare. Approve construction of 100 finned prototypes for a live-fire comparison test. If Klein's theory failed, the project was dead. If it succeeded, full production changes would begin immediately, cost be damned. Fletcher was overruled by his commanding officer, which made the upcoming test a matter of personal and professional pride. The standard military response to being overruled is to design a test so rigorous it proves you were right all along. If the fins failed under harsh conditions, Fletcher's caution would be vindicated. If they succeeded, he'd order the modifications and take credit for ensuring due diligence. Either way, the institution would protect itself. The test date was set for January 15, 1945. Aberdeen Proving Ground, captured German King Tiger armor plate. 20 shots with standard M20 rockets. 20 shots with Klein's finned prototypes. Everything measured, documented, and witnessed by a full board of inquiry. Before we get to that frigid morning at Aberdeen, you need to understand why adding fins to a rocket would make it punch through 10 inches of steel instead of 5. The physics here is crucial, and it's not what most people assume. First, let's talk about what happens when a shaped charge warhead strikes armor. The warhead contains a high explosive charge behind a cone of copper. Think of a copper funnel, point facing backward toward the explosive. When the warhead detonates, the shockwave collapses that copper cone inward at speeds over 25,000 feet per second. This collapse turns the copper into a superheated jet of plasma, a stream of metal so hot and fast it behaves more like a liquid than a solid. This jet, traveling at nearly Mach 30, hits the armor and literally melts its way through, creating a narrow but devastatingly deep penetration channel. Here's the key part. The jet forms in microseconds, about 30 millionths of a second after impact. The geometry of that impact has to be perfect. If the warhead strikes at an angle, even 20 degrees off perpendicular, penetration effectiveness drops by 40%. At 45 degrees, you might not penetrate at all. The jet forms but splatters across the armor's surface instead of boring through. This is why the standard M20 rocket's instability was such a catastrophe. A rocket drifting through the air might hit the tank at a slight angle, nose right, nose up, or any random orientation. Even when it hit, it often failed to deliver its full penetrating power. Now add fins. A finned rocket stabilizes itself the moment it leaves the launch tube. This aerodynamic stability works through basic principles, like the feathers on an arrow. The fins resist any tendency of the rocket to yaw or tumble. For the M20 rocket, this meant once it left the tube pointed at the target, it stayed pointed at the target for its entire flight. No drifting, no wobbling, just a straight line to the point of aim. But Klein understood something more profound. The stability didn't just ensure a straight trajectory. It ensured a perpendicular impact. Research from 1943 by German physicist Werner Heisenberg had shown that the angle of impact was the single most critical factor in shaped charge effectiveness. A stable rocket would almost always strike nose first. Too much spin, over 10,000 RPM, would actually disperse the jet due to centrifugal force. But moderate spin in the 2,000 to 3,000 RPM range helped the jet maintain its focused power by smoothing out tiny imperfections in the copper liner. Think of it like this. An unstable rocket hitting a tank is like trying to drill a hole with a wobbling drill bit. You might make a dent, and even if you do, the hole will be shallow and messy. A fin-stabilized rocket is like using a drill press. You hit exactly where you aim, and you apply force in a perfectly straight line. The math backed this up. Klein's calculations predicted finned rockets would maintain a nose-forward orientation within 5 degrees of their launch axis over a 150-yard flight. This meant the shaped charge jet would form perpendicular to the armor surface nearly every time, maximizing its penetrating force. The standard M20 rockets were hitting with angular variations of up to 30 degrees, which explained why their penetration results were so wildly inconsistent. There was also a secondary benefit no one had fully anticipated. The stabilized flight meant the rocket retained more of its velocity over distance. This meant it spent less time in the air, giving the target less time to move and the wind less time to affect its path. That extra velocity also translated to a harder impact, slightly improving penetration even before the shaped charge did its work. So the promise was this: fins would deliver consistent, nose-first impacts at higher effective velocities, which would generate perfectly formed shaped charge jets hitting perpendicular to the armor, which should, in theory, produce 11 inches of penetration at 100 yards. That's more than double what the standard M20s achieved on their best days. And more importantly, it would be consistent. Every shot, the same result. Theory is one thing. Testing is where ideas either fly straight or fall short. January 15th, 1945, was bitterly cold at Aberdeen Proving Ground. The temperature at dawn was 15 degrees. with a biting wind sweeping in from the northwest, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes steel painful to touch. Not the best conditions for testing experimental munitions, but the final push into Germany was underway, and if these finned rockets were going to make a difference, the testing couldn't wait for spring. The test range was set up with brutal simplicity. 150 yards downrange, engineers had welded a captured King Tiger's turret front plate to a steel frame. The plate was 185 meters of rolled homogeneous armor, the thickest operational tank armor in the world, capable of shrugging off shells from most Allied tanks. Behind the plate, they stacked sandbags to measure the energy of any successful penetration. Beside the King Tiger plate stood other steel plates of varying thicknesses: 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches, 11 inches. These would determine the absolute maximum penetration. The observation bunker held a dozen officers and engineers, including Colonel Fletcher, General Thorne, Major Cole, and Dr. Klein. Official protocol required a board of witnesses for any test that could change standard-issue ordnance. Several Aberdeen ballisticians were present to certify the measurements. A stenographer recorded every word. The mood, according to Cole's memoirs, was as frosty as the ground outside. The test protocol was direct. 20 shots with standard M20 rockets at 100 yards, followed by 20 shots with Klein's finned prototypes at the same range. 3 different gunners for each weapon to cancel out user error. Targets would be inspected after every 5-shot group. Hit rate, penetration depth, and impact angle would all be recorded. First up, the standard M20 baseline. The operator, a master sergeant from the Aberdeen Ordnance School, shouldered the M20 launcher, aimed at the King Tiger plate, and fired. The rocket shot out with a deafening roar, trailing gray smoke. It struck the plate 3 feet high and to the right of the aiming point, exploding in a bright flash. Engineers downrange inspected the impact. A shallow, fist-sized crater. 0 penetration. Shot 2, 2 feet low. 0 penetration. Shot 3 missed the plate completely, veering left. Exactly the stability problem that prompted this test. Shot 4, a direct hit. It gouged out a deeper crater but still failed to penetrate. Shot 5, another miss. The pattern was one of dangerous unreliability. Even when the rockets hit the target, their unstable flight path meant they struck at oblique angles, dissipating their energy across the surface. By shot 15 of the standard rocket group, the results were grimly predictable. 8 hits out of 15 shots fired. Penetration, 0. The 4 misses at 100 yards, a reasonable engagement distance, were damning. One rocket had drifted so much it impacted nearly 10 feet wide of the target. These results matched the reports from the front. The standard M20 simply could not defeat a King Tiger frontally. The finned prototypes came next. Klein had overseen the modification of 100 rockets, fitting each with a spring-loaded fin assembly designed to snap open as it cleared the tube. The fins were simple, stamped steel, just enough to provide aerodynamic stability. First finned shot. A perfect bullseye. A brilliant flash, and then a puff of smoke from the back of the 185mm plate. The engineers downrange called out the measurement, and a wave of disbelief swept through the observation bunker. Complete penetration. Second shot, complete penetration. Third shot, complete penetration. Fourth shot, complete penetration. Fifth shot, complete penetration. Every rocket flew as straight as an arrow, striking nose first and punching through the thickest armor the Germans could field. Fletcher demanded the test be paused while engineers confirmed the plate's thickness and composition. They remeasured everything. The numbers were correct. The test resumed. Shot 15 with the finned rocket was aimed at the thickest test plate, 11 inches of solid steel armor. The rocket hit dead center, detonated and sent a shower of molten steel out the back of the plate that was visible from the bunker 200 yards away. The range crew waited a full minute for the shrapnel to cool before approaching, then called back the results. Complete penetration. The shaped charge jet had burned through all 11 inches and deep into the sandbags behind it. General Thorne stood up from his observation chair. According to the official report filed that afternoon, he said 3 words: "Build these now." The stenographer noted that Fletcher started to object, stating that further testing was required. Thorne cut him off. The test was over. Shots 16 through 20 produced results that had Aberdeen's engineers rereading their own textbooks: 10.8 inches, 11.1 inches, 10.9 inches, 11.2 inches, 11.0 inches. Not a single shot penetrated less than 10.8 inches. Not a single shot missed the target plate. The consistency was what left everyone speechless. Standard rocket penetration was 0, with a 53% hit rate. Finned rocket penetration averaged over 11 inches, with a 100% hit rate. You could rely on what a finned rocket would do. You could bet your life on it. The observers went downrange after the final shot to see the plates for themselves. Every finned rocket impact showed the same clean, circular hole, roughly an inch in diameter, perfectly perpendicular to the armor, with smooth edges indicating the shaped charge jet had formed with maximum efficiency. The standard M20 impacts looked entirely different. Shallow, jagged craters, some showing signs of the rocket striking at a severe angle. Back in the observation bunker, the ballistics team presented the final numbers. The data was an absolute vindication of Klein's design. Hit probability at 100 yards. Standard M20, 53%. Finned M20, 100%. Average penetration, standard M20, 0 inches. Finned M20, 11.0 inches. Maximum confirmed penetration, standard M20, 0 inches. Finned M20, 11.2 inches. Consistency rating, a measure of performance deviation, standard M20, unacceptable. Finned M20, exceeded all expectations. But here's the number that mattered most to the men on the front lines. Probability of defeating 185mm frontal armor on a King Tiger. Standard M20 rocket, 0%. Finned M20 rocket, 99%. A soldier with a finned M20 rocket could reliably kill the most powerful German tank he would ever face. A soldier with the standard version would die trying. General Thorne convened an emergency decision meeting in Aberdeen's main hall. Present were Fletcher, Cole, Klein, 4 ordnance production heads, and 2 logistics colonels. The meeting took less than 30 minutes. The question wasn't whether to adopt the Finns. The test data had made that unavoidable. The question was how fast they could retool the production lines and get them to Europe. Production heads reported that manufacturing the Finn assemblies was simple, but retrofitting tens of thousands of existing rockets would be a logistical nightmare. Each rocket would have to be uncrated, disassembled, fitted with the Finn assembly, reassembled, and recrated. Time per rocket, approximately 15 minutes. Cost per rocket, $18 for parts and labor. With 3 factories running modification lines 24/7, they could convert the existing inventory in 3 months. The logistics officers delivered the bad news. 20,000 M20 rockets had been manufactured. 12,000 were still in depots in the U.S. and could be modified before being shipped. 8,000 were already in the European theater of operations. 3,000 in France, 3,000 in Belgium, and 2,000 at supply dumps in England. Recalling those weapons for modification was impossible. The war wouldn't wait. Thorne made the decision in seconds. Begin manufacturing new rockets with fins integrated immediately. Ship them by air freight to Europe. Develop a field kit to retrofit the rockets already overseas. The first finned M20 rockets reached combat units in late February 1945, just in time for the final push across the Rhine. The 9th Armored Division received 500 new M20A1 launchers and rockets, the new designation for the finned munitions, during the fight for the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. Sergeant Michael Chen's after-action report from March 7th described an engagement that would have been a suicide mission a month earlier. His two-man team engaged a King Tiger at 80 yards, fired one shot, and watched the tank's turret hatch blow open as the crew bailed out, their vehicle burning. First shot, total kill. He wrote that his men finally had a fair fight. By March, production had shifted entirely to the finned models. The M22A1 Super Bazooka, an improved system with a better sight and a two-piece barrel for portability, started rolling off assembly lines with the new rockets as standard issue. These were the weapons that crossed the Rhine in Operation Plunder, where the 82nd Airborne used them to shatter German armored counterattacks. Lieutenant Colonel James Gavin's paratroopers reported their bazooka teams accounted for 14 confirmed heavy tank kills during the first 2 days of the operation. The Ruhr Pocket in April 1945 was the final stress test. German forces threw their remaining panzer divisions at the Allied encirclement, including veteran SS units equipped with King Tigers. But the M20A1's 11-inch penetration capability meant even these behemoths were vulnerable. Private David Kenyon, a bazooka gunner with the 2nd Infantry Division, later described stalking a King Tiger in a ruined factory. "You knew if your shot was true, you'd punch right through it. That knowledge let you get close, let you do your job." D-Day, June 6, 1944. Every American infantry company that hit Utah and Omaha beaches carried at least 4 bazooka teams. The weapons proved essential not just against armor, but against fortified German positions, where the shape-charged jet could blow through concrete gun imp placements. The real proving ground came during the final battles for Germany. American infantry divisions advancing into the heart of the Reich ran into desperate, last-ditch German armor assaults constantly. This was exactly the scenario the Super Bazooka was designed for. Close-quarters combat, where a single infantryman's weapon could decide the fate of a battle. The 3rd Armored Division logged 42 confirmed heavy armor kills with M20A1s during the drive to Berlin. Tank destroyers and Pershing tanks got most of the headlines, but the private journals of infantrymen tell the real story. Bazooka teams often stopped German tanks before friendly armor could even get into position. The Ardennes Offensive in December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, tested everything. German Panther and Tiger tanks smashed through American lines in fog and snow. Isolated infantry units found themselves defending crossroads and towns with bazookas as their primary anti-tank weapon. By the time American forces met the Soviets at the Elbe River in April 1945, the Super Bazooka had accounted for over 400 confirmed German heavy armor kills in the European theater. That 400 number tells only part of the story. The real revolution was in the confidence it gave the common infantryman. Before the finned M20A1, portable rocket launchers were weapons of desperation that might work if you were lucky. After Aberdeen's January 1945 test, they became precision instruments that infantry commanders could rely on. And every rocket weapon America developed in the post-war era started with one non-negotiable requirement. It must have stabilizing fins. The 3.5-inch M20 Super Bazooka that became standard issue after the war came with fins machined directly into the rocket body during manufacture. This weapon could penetrate 11 inches of armor, enough to threaten any tank in the world at the time. When North Korean T-34 tanks rolled south in June 1950, American infantry units rushed to the front, stopped them with M20s, weapons that existed because Klein convinced skeptical officers that aerodynamic stability was worth the effort just 5 years earlier. Korea proved the value of fins in ways World War II never could. The terrain, steep hills, tight valleys, city streets, meant tanks and infantry were constantly fighting at close range. The M20's accuracy allowed a two-man team to hunt and destroy tanks from concealed positions with a high probability of success. After-action reports from the defense of the Pusan perimeter in August 1950 show Bazooka teams were responsible for 58 T-34 kills in 3 weeks. First Lieutenant Lee, Iron Mike Mitchell's company knocked out 6 tanks in a single afternoon near Pohang Dong, using tactics that were entirely dependent on the weapon's straight-shooting performance. The technology became universal. When the Army developed the M72 LAW, light anti-tank weapon, in 1963, designers incorporated folding fins into the rocket from the very first blueprint. Every LAW fired in Vietnam, and millions used the same stabilization principle Klein had championed. The Tau anti-tank missile system, fielded in 1970, combined fin stabilization with wire guidance. The AT-4, which replaced the LAW in the 1980s, featured advanced fin designs optimized by supercomputers that still adhered to Klein's original aerodynamic principles. Operation Desert Storm in 1991 brought the evolution to its zenith. American infantry carried AT-4s and Dragon anti-tank missiles, all fin-stabilized, all delivering first-shot kills against Iraqi armor. But they also carried something newer, the Javelin, a fire-and-forget missile that used pop-out fins to guide itself to a tank's vulnerable top armor. The guidance system was 21st-century technology. The fin stabilization ensuring the missile flew true was 1945 technology that no one had found a reason to improve upon. The Marine Corps adopted the SMAW, shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapon, in 1984, specifically because its fin-stabilized rockets delivered consistent accuracy against both armor and fortified bunkers. U.S. Marines used the SMAW in Iraq and Afghanistan for more than 3 decades. The weapon's reputation for unerring accuracy traced a direct line back to the engineering principles validated on that frozen field at Aberdeen. Even modern systems like the Predator drone's Hellfire missile feature pop-out fins for stable flight. 80 years after Klein's test, American soldiers still carry weapons built on his core insight. Make the rocket fly straight, and it will win the fight. Dr. Arthur Klein never became a household name. Most soldiers who used the Super Bazooka to stop tanks in Korea or Vietnam never heard of him. He died in 1987 in Boston, his obituary mentioning his work in aeronautics, but saying nothing about the Aberdeen test that saved countless American lives. Major Cole received a Legion of Merit for his role in developing the M20 and retired as a brigadier general in 1968. The official credit for the fin-stabilized rocket went to the innovative spirit of the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. But every infantryman who shouldered a rocket launcher after January 15, 1945, owed his confidence to one civilian engineer who refused to accept that good enough was good enough.